person behind the pro. My name is Mario, the person behind the pro.
Welcome everyone to My Name is Mario, episode, I don't remember the number, probably 17. This new year 2025 has started fantastically, and today we're going to talk about the future of games QA with my two guests, Ben Wibberley and Erik Hittenhausen. Welcome guys.
Thank you.
Hey Pietro, thanks for having us.
So for those who don't know these two veterans of QA, we have Ben Wibberley, who's Ben. I'm just gonna say a word about your last thing because you are the founder of DACA, so I'm not gonna say the past 20 years because it's a little bit too long, even more than 20 years if I'm not mistaken, right?
I've just realised actually as of last night, it's 30 years as of January this year. So, yes.
Dangerous number, dangerous 30, dangerous number. And and Erik, well, you've been around also like a couple of years. Erik also knows all the ins and outs of QA. Well, welcome to you too, Erik.
Yeah, it's nice to be here.
So today I want to make no real lengthy summary of who's what because like we really need to talk about QA. And these two guys, they really know this topic. And I had separate chats with them already, and oh wow, if they start talking about QA, they can go a long way. They can talk for hours. So what I want to do today, skip any real intro and get into a few questions. Recently in the past few years, QA has suffered a little bit from lots of layoffs. There is no news that there's been like hundreds of thousands layoffs in the past couple of years, and the situation is getting slightly better now. But we have seen entire teams of QA being cut here and there. Looks almost like it's the first to go, it feels like it's the first evil that it can be removed. Am I right? Am I wrong?
All right, I will start. I mean, I think that there have been a lot of layoffs in the games industry, right? And I think that there are a number of different reasons for that, which is maybe this is or isn't the right place to have that conversation. But I think for me, if we're really boiling it down to QA, as I was thinking about this question I don't know, going back to like traditional models, right? If you think about sort of the traditional big publishers, right? Your EAs, your Activisions, your Ubisofts, and everything was effectively kept in house, right? Everything was kept in house. There was very little that was outsourced. And really where you need to get to is you need to get to a balance, right? Because the industry has changed significantly over time. But more so than anything, I think if you go back to that traditional model, you would always be told that two biggest departments inside of a games publisher, I use the word publisher for the purposes of this conversation, the two biggest departments, the first was player support and the second was QA. They were always your two biggest departments, right? So it's your biggest amount of headcount, it's your biggest amount of overhead. So to a certain extent, that hasn't really changed today. I actually think that if you really start to think about it, and I know we'll get into this later, right? You think about the impact of artificial intelligence, you think about like tools, technologies, like what you can replace effectively. I think that's probably been heavier on the player support side than it has on the QA side. So maybe that balance has changed. Is QA like one of the biggest departments that you have? So I think when you're seeing though the industry layoffs, and like I said, the reasons for those have been manifold. But if you're looking at the QA department, its biggest department, therefore you're going to see more of them going. There is no doubt, though, from reading the numbers, if you read like the IGDA studies and stuff like that, QA has suffered some of the heaviest hits, but I think there's also some mitigating reasons behind that.
Yeah. And Erik, it's like it's always to one thing that I noticed, working also actually together with you. We worked together for almost 15 years. One of the biggest struggles that we have noticed that it's always been hard to illustrate the value of QA to production and leadership. So my mind goes like it's trying to link these two topics. And so with the current industry crisis, yeah, let's call it crisis, even though like looks like is kind of getting a little bit better, and ongoing layoffs, will this perception change or only get worse? Well, what's your take on that?
I think that it's evident to most people that the increasing complexity of games is also increasing the value of having real integration and competence in your QA function. It's just a question of how do you access it and how do you scale it, how much do you do in-house, and how much can you partner on, also depending on where you are in the development cycle. I do think it's quite a tragedy on the short term, all the layoffs hitting QA, because just a few years ago we were having a lot of shortages of developers and a lot of concern about there not being enough talent in the pipeline, while QA has always been such a great entry into the industry. And I know so many people that are now producers, level designers, etc., that all made their bones in QA, especially development QA. And that's where you see a lot of those cuts happening now. So I think that may come back to bite the industry in the near term.
Okay. Yeah, for me, it's always interesting this problem that we always seen, just to explain even the importance of QA. You know what I mean? Like it's always the problem was for me first as proper, being like a QA manager, then moving to sales, account managing. It always feels that it was like sort of like the fifth wheel, the necessary evil. Even this is something that I heard was a necessary evil.
But that's the challenge, Mario, right? And I think really when you get to steal, right? The words of a friend of mine, Chelsea Karen Adams, I think it's down to us. I think we have a perception problem, right? And I think it's down to us to advocate for the value of QA, because if we don't demonstrate it, the challenge is we can sit here and be like sort of what we were talking about back and forth on the email, right? Or where I was coming from about clickbait and stuff, right? Which is if you sit here, and I did it for a number of years through, I'm not saying this is the IGTA coming at it from this angle, but like this like angry fist waving about, we're here, look at us, right? That's not demonstrating the value, right? So really what we need to do is we need to advocate for the craft. And you talk about, the fifth wheel, it's really that QA is like that fifth element of game development. You talk about the sort of the four key elements, right? You've got design, you've got engineering, you've got art, you've got audio, and then that fifth element, right? The fifth critical part of that is QA. And so when I talk about changing that perception, it's like, how do we demonstrate that? Because when you sit in a meeting with your executive or your senior leadership team or whatever the heck it is, right? The nature of what we do is, well, my dad would use, like Shankly's chains, right? Oh, here comes QA. They're going to come with bad news. There's going to be more bugs. We're going to have more work to do, right? But really where you need to get to is, right, it's not about the bugs. It's absolutely not about the bugs. It's about what is the effect then on the players, right? And if you start to think about it in those terms, that's when you can really start to communicate the value. Because the less bugs that you have, or the better of the quality of the player experience, the more likely you are to retain those players. The more likely you are to retain the players, the more likely you are to make more. Right? It's fairly simple business terms, So I think like when we go, and rather than talking about there are this amount of bugs and we have to fix this, that don't get me wrong, find fix and sort of KPIs and metrics are like that are critical. I think we need to talk about the business case more. Like that's certainly where I come at it. Like if we're away from like individual contributors and we're away from conversations about how do we develop people and how do we develop people's careers, because that's a separate conversation. How do we advocate on the value? It's just like, if we do this, this will have a more positive effect on the players and therefore that will bolster revenue. So where you get to is a point where you can't just have your bug metrics, your bug KPIs, you have to overlay them, right? You have to overlay your telemetry, which always tells you the what is happening, telemetry, the data that you're getting out of the game or the amount of bugs that you have, the what, with the player sentiment, which gives you the why. If you put those two things together, or sales numbers, whatever that happens to be, then you can basically go to your executive and you can communicate what that value is. Because otherwise, all they see is that QA is a sunk cost, and it's just this budgetary black hole. And why the hell are we doing it? So we need to change that. We need to advocate for what it is that we do. So to answer the question, I don't see it as being a fifth wheel. We need to demonstrate how it is the fifth element, because it is a very complex discipline in today's world.
Yeah, no, I think describing it as the fifth integral discipline is very apt. I think it's something that more and more people are seeing, but it's still too often the case that QA is either not considered as a critical core discipline in that way, or it's underemphasized early on in the development process. And I think it's really important to look at QA as a strategic and integral function of the development process, not as a tax that you have to pay on top or as a bottleneck that you have to bring yourself through later on. And especially with expanding development cycles and the importance of post-release support, it's all about preventing problems early on and setting yourself up for success. And by having shift left or early engagement in QA, not only can you prevent early issues and reduce your technical debt, but you're also reducing operational knowledge debt later on in development and QA, and also setting up for post-release. You want to have some QA involvement right from the start, so that not that when you hit beta, the QA guys say, hey, if we had this debug function, we could have saved like half the budget. And then it's like, oh, it's well too late now, but that maybe next game, right? That still happens more often than you'd like to think after all these years.
And I agree with what Erik said, and I'll come back to some stuff about, being the best training ground, right? It's the best entry point in for people and people's careers, and like what you learn at that particular point in time. I also think that when you're looking at it, what Erik said about, shifting left or finding it early, and shift left is fucking hard to do, right? And that's where we got to at Jagex, which was, we need to shift left, but it's incredibly difficult to do with how the development processes work. But even if you shift left a little bit, it's still shifting left, right? But that bug prevention, to Erik's point, is critical to me. When bugs hit live, they cost you an exponential amount of money, right? So escape defects, particularly exploits, and this is what we found at Jagex, and I know it to be the case with other MMOs and and this will be in live service. There's an exploit in the game. The player can do whatever the player is that they can do, but they can basically gain the game, right, for in-game currency or whatever that happens to be. If you've got one of those and that's escaped, and it escapes and it's minor, and you find it and you see immediately, like, oh, we need to fix that. Minimum is about £10,000 worth of cost. In an average scenario, it's at least 50,000, right? And I know because we ran the numbers, and I've been told by people that I know, that my peer group that I've come up through the business with as well. The cost of the exploit currency, it's the cost of player support, answering the questions, it's the cost of the dev team having to go back, it's studio reputation and damage, it's all of those sort of things. Whereas if you had the stuff and spent a little bit more time earlier on to ensure that that did not escape, it would cost you a lot less money. So these are the sort of, like, again, Erik's point, the business arguments you have to go back to. Like, they're like, why do you want to shift left? It's like, well, if we shift left here, we will need less resources here, right? So yeah, it has to come back to the advocation, and I'm really sorry because this is where I'm at, and people, like, I'm sure my teams and I'm sure my client, like, sick of me telling you about it, it's a business case.
Can I be a bastard and I ask a, like, throw a curveball here? So because, like, this is, I think we agree. Basically, what Erik and you were saying, start early, correct? So start early, cost you less. Why do you want to do it later? But this kind of type of conversation, I heard it for the past 15 years. I heard QA people doing this or saying this forever. So why we never managed to change the way that QA have been perceived? We're not listening. We're not talking to the right people. And also, have you noticed studios shifting how they value and invest in QA since the wave of layoffs, for example? And do smaller studio feel this impact differently than large publishers? I don't know. And also, so did we manage? We didn't manage? What are we doing wrong? Who are we talking? Are we talking to the right people, to the wrong people? Are we saying with the right words? Are we the right people to talk about it?
I think there's still a gap to bridge between what is traditionally considered as dev embedded internal QA and what is seen too much as the bums and seats or the bulk QA that people look to get out of the service providers later on in the development cycle. I think dev QA is already shifting left a lot, but there's always resource constraints. That's why they engage with partners later on. I think if you engage a partner earlier and really integrate those two teams in a meaningful way, I think that's where the low-hanging fruit is right now.
Wait a second, Ben. Because I need to just beware, because I need to mute you when Erik talked, because like there is like a bad like sound. Also, when you speak, the quality of the audio is not really good. So I need to mute you. So whenever you want to come in, just I try to be as fast as possible. Before I managed, now I didn't manage. So now you just take like 1 second, and then you say your thing.
Okay, we're good. I think for me it goes back to perception, right? The way that we describe it, it's functional QA. That doesn't say that it has any value to me, right? It's quality control after the fact. It's a brute force exercise, right? Rather than going through and making it. And the fact is that you can't do functional release verification effectively in a live service game, right? That's what's changed. You can have it up to the point of release, but then when it's live, you can't be having the dev QA running through a set of checks on a piece of content and then be sending it through for publishing verification, send it through for a second set. Those two things become one and the same, right? And then I also think, like, we talk about it, convincing people to do shift left is not an easy thing to do. I was at the Live Game Summit in London last year, and you talk to people that have technical directors or, you know, those sort of roles, and they talk about technical debt that they have on their engine. And it's always something where they said that the exact phrase that came up in the panel was kicking the can down the road. Because the fact is, right, whether we like it or not, and I like it, right, this is a business. This is an industry. Right, our responsibility to our teams is to make money. We make money, we can pay them. They can pay their bills. They've got a roof over their head. They can feed their kids, whatever that happens to be, right? But when you go with an argument that says, well, you know, I've seen it many times, Pietro, right? We need to do automation, because automation for the existing content you have is literally the best way that you can go and address some of these issues. But you go to the executive and you say, right, for the next 2 years, we're going to put software engineers in, or SDETs, or whatever you want to call them, right? And we're going to spend more money. And then after 2 years, that then relatively is going to drop off, right? So the cost of your functional QA is going to drop off, and the cost is going to even out, and then the cost is going to eventually, on a 3-year view. Most studios don't look that far in advance. They can't, right? Because they're revenue generating. So what can we do? What are those small changes that we can make, that we can augment? Because there's very few, you know, there's probably 5 games, I think, I couldn't name all of them, that are out there that have literally the automation piece built in. Sea of Thieves is the best example, right? That's literally built in. But everything else is not, right? So how do we get past that? Well, I don't think that simply saying, adding more people to go in and do quality control, which is different, Erik, right, from quality assurance. Because quality assurance is ensuring it doesn't happen in the first place, right? Getting out of that mentality, that's the key to it. But we have to be better at advocating for the value of what it is, what we do, right? And that comes down to business code.
Yeah, no, and especially for games that have a long life cycle, and games that are in live ops that are getting bi-weekly content updates. If you're not setting yourself up for that to scale with that on a strategic or a test strategy level, you often end up seeing yourself just throwing more and more resources at it until you get to the point where it becomes unsustainable. And then you think, okay, do we cut resources or do we stabilize the team here and then optimize the process? But you kind of want to start that optimization before you hit that wall, because once you hit the wall, you're already incurring the interest on your debt.
I mean, we still need more people, right? And
Okay. Yeah.
I'll do a shameless plug. I don't make any money out of it, but I wrote the other day about I did the foreword for game testing all in one for Robert Bryant, right, the book. And as I was thinking about that, we do need more people, right? There are more people, but to Eric's point, you can't then take that up to, it could be, I don't know, large organization, let's say 2,000, but it can't be 5,000. That doesn't work. It doesn't scale. Like there's no way on this earth that you can come and make some sort of cost-effective argument about that, right? So we need more people, but we need more people multifaceted. We need to open up the career paths, right? We need to develop more engineers. We need to develop, more data analysts. Like the data is critical for where it is that we're going, right? We can look at the data that's being pulled from everybody that's inside the game when it's inside development, and that will tell us way more than what throwing a test team at it would do. I mean, I'll give you like my 1 minute rule. I told you my 1 minute rule before. So
No. No.
this blew my mind, right? I was in Vancouver. It was either last year or the year before. And a friend of mine, Paul McGaw, he looks after QA for EAFC. So, we went to catch up and we're sitting, when I say his office, sitting in his cube, right? And he was saying that, like, there's like 500 testers on that product. 500. And they have code automation and they have all of this, like, amazing data and all of this other stuff that's there. But the fact is, when they do a season launch, their players rack up more playtime in the first minute, less than a minute, than those 500 testers do for the entirety of the previous year. So when you think about that, and you think about the volume of what it is that we're dealing with, and you think about who's going to find your bugs first, who's going to find your edge cases first, the answer is it's your players, right? There's only two ways to tackle that. One is tech, and one is like better listening to the players because they'll find it. And how do you then take that information and bring it back?
Interesting, Eric. Right? I know that you have something to say on this because I can remember we were talking about this, about the X amount of testing that you could do before launch, and then how many millions people are gonna play your game like within the first 24, 48 hours. And
Yeah, no,
then
exactly. That's essentially the point that Ben just made, is that when you have a million players, the amount of time they rack up, it's just you can't compete with that on sheer iteration. And I think that's where, looking at the future then of games QA, I think that data engineering and conceptualization of the testing is what is becoming increasingly important over just raw execution or the performance of testing. And not to segue too aggressively into the big AI topic, but I think that's where AI is so interesting, in that it can do those iterations, it can do those repetitions for you. You need a tester that comes up with the right things to test to tell the AI what to do. But using a simple example with Collision, for example, if you have a huge open world game, it's not that long ago, or even still today, where you have just teams of dozens, if not hundreds of people running into every wall and every rock and tree in a level. Whereas if you can just have a tester describe, hey, run into every wall, run into every tree, run into every rock, tell me how it happened, and then AI can do that 100,000 times and come back with a heat map, that's where it needs to go.
okay, well, yeah. That's so one question. Also, like it's more than a question; it's more of a thought, right? That we've seen more and more remote only QA models. And so first is what is your feeling about remote work, and also in the past few years, Dev QA it was always there's something that was always trying to be internally, especially Dev Studio didn't really want to outsource this type of service, and nowadays I have this feeling that it's changing a little bit. So Dev QA can be outsourced a little bit more because they've seen the power of remote work. If you need to do it remote with someone that is, of course, like in the worst for your company, at that point, this is something I think they game developers have managed to realize that this is something that they can outsource more. Is this something that you guys have also seen in the past couple of years has changed this dichotomy of like, nah, I keep it in, I don't give it out? What do you feel about it?
It feels like an increasing trend post COVID. I think it's interesting that service providers, kind of by their nature, are always external to their partners and developers. And by extension, they have a lot of experience working in that setup already because it's their very nature. And switching to testing from home or remotely, which prior to COVID, I think in the outsource space was pretty much unthinkable with the emphasis on security and confidentiality. Uh, went, I think, surprisingly well, and a lot better than a lot of people expected. Similarly, DevQA has long been a bastion, and I think there's always been some sentiment of DevQA being over external QA and people being a bit protective of their internal teams in that dynamic. But with so many people working remotely, seeing how well it can work, having their own people working remotely as well, I think it's opened people's perspectives on the possibility of engaging that as a service as well. And I think the benefit of that is having the same scalability that you traditionally look for in more of the black box execution type testing, but just a higher touch type of capability.
I can go with this one without doing a shameless plug, right? When we set up DAQA in 2017, we were fully remote. We were fully remote. And the belief that I had at that point, this is pre-COVID, obviously, the belief I had at that point was that not just on the external partner side, but the game side was changing. It was all becoming about live, right? And if you think about live requires you can't just have a facility in a location, right? You need testers from all over. To Erik's point, right? Why would you not open up the sort of the demographics and everything else? I think there is a point where you also need physical facilities, right? Whether that's for housing content, whether housing consoles, whether that's some sort of network operations center. This is why we chose to open New Orleans in November, right? We've grown to a point where we're like, we actually need a physical location to do this. But I don't want to get into that work from home or work from the office sort of argument, right? I think that in today's world, everybody like weaponizes those conversations. And I think I read something on LinkedIn yesterday, somebody just like, why can't we have the best of both, right? Why can't we have the best of both? There's the fact that working remotely enables people, but there's also the fact that if you want to develop people, they develop a lot better when they're in the office together, right? So you need to get to that balance, right? That's the first particular part of it, I think, with remote. And just from a pure logistics perspective, why wouldn't you? Right? Absolutely, why wouldn't you? But if it goes back to it, the second part to answer your question, Pietro, right? Dev QA versus functional QA. I mean, that's the difference. And it goes to, if you want the contentious point, everybody wants it cheaper. Now, I don't agree with it. I've been doing this for 30 years, man. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've had every conversation about reduce your rates, reduce your rates, reduce your rates. And I'm telling you that it's a mistake to purely focus on how much that hourly rate is. Because all you're doing by pushing down that rate is then pushing down the cost of how much the testers are. So it either pushes down on the testers or it pushes down on the quality. And as a result of that, effectively quality suffers, right? And when you look at like what those relationships are, and it's the elephant in the room, if you like, I think that there are challenges on both sides, the external partner side, right, and on the studio side. It's not about the hourly rate, it's about the effectiveness of what you're going to deliver. But I do think that because of that, and because of the way that many external partners operate, forgive me, right? I'll just say it. They're not capable of delivering dev QA because they're literally delivering bums on seats. I need 100 people and I need them tomorrow, brute force. Okay, we'll get you 100 people. They're not. What are we doing for our people then? How are we developing them? How are we training them? What are we like? What are we doing? Right. So you do the dev QA. You have to demonstrate to be able to do it, and we're doing it. DAQA have done it. I have an amazing team. We are a lot smaller than a lot of the bigger outfits, right? And it's what the market needs at any particular point in time. Does a very large organization, does a very large publisher necessarily need to have embedded dev QA from external partner? Don't know. Does a mid-size independent? Yes, probably. But they have to be able to incorporate that into their working systems. The team on the other side have to be able to develop that, and then you have to earn that right to be there. But just simply saying we're going to embed, this is going to be dev QA today, it's not the point. Can they work in engine? Can they run test cases? Can they do test planning? Can they do test strategy? Can they be incorporated? Will they have a voice? And it has to be enabled to have a voice from the studio. But at the same time, Eric, you know this, right? And I know this from like my time at Fable, like BMC, all of these sort of things. The external service providers, they won't speak out. They won't tell their clients, hey, this is a problem, right? Because they don't feel like, because it's the client. That's the business that they're relying on. So you really have to get to this, I don't want to say safe space, but this point of trust where they think they can, where they, you're enabling your people to be able to do that and really develop on dev QA. But it's not just a case of like, oh, we don't do functional black box anymore. Now we do dev QA. You have to be able to execute. And they have to understand, they have to be able to see the value. They have to be able to see beyond the hourly rate, because the hourly rate will be higher. But something I was taught, I learned a lot working with Riot, actually. Did a lot of work with Riot when I was at VMC. And sort of, the challenge there is, can you step up? Right? Can you do this for us? Can you get to the point where you are self-managing? Right? To be able to learn that, to be able to do that. And that's hard. That's hard for people to do. So I think we can talk about it. I think it's possible, but there's work that needs to be done on both sides. And again, it comes to me personally. It comes down to perception, and it comes down to advocating for that.
I say, Eric, I see you. You want to say something, and I want to bring out
I think the ideal would ultimately be to move away from everything being driven by hours and headcounts and being driven more by objectives and outcomes. And how do you create the conditions to reach the objectives and the outcomes that you're aspiring to? And we were already talking about early engagement and integration of QA and development before. And I think Dev QA is kind of that pivotal link between black box QA and development. And by having a part of the development QA function integrated into the service landscape as well, it can really be that bridge between the two, and having that function be the team doing the early engagement, really getting that deep understanding of the game systems, setting up the tools, creating the knowledge base, and creating that foundation that you can then later leverage to quickly integrate and scale up your black box teams as they start scaling up as you get further down the development cycle.
Yeah, and sorry, because like on this topic about, like, I was very caught up by what you guys said, but especially caught my attention was what Ben was saying about pricing and lowering this, me especially, well, first as a QA manager, but then also as yes, but just like, because like I have an example that for me it was very important when that happened in the past, right? We had a client, and a year, like 1 year, actually every year they're trying to don't increase it that much or lower the rate, etc., etc. So we were trying to accommodate the request. And then 1 year we said, like, we really can't do it. We had to do it. And then during the year, one of our leads was their favorite left to go somewhere else, and then she actually told our client. She mentioned, I need to leave. I've asked for it for a salary raise. They couldn't accommodate this request. They couldn't, and I took another job at a game developer in another place here in Warsaw, and so this lead went away. And then a client came to me and say, "Oh, you let her go? Why didn't?" And then I told him, obviously there is always this master and slaver kind of mentality, and I tried to find the best way to communicate that. But the core of the message was, you keep asking me for reducing the rates, and when I say I want to raise the rates by 7% because inflation went up 10%, I'm already taking a hit, and you don't read it, and then you see, that's exactly what happens, right? We just don't do it to have a bigger margin in most cases, or at least that was my case. But yeah, that kind of was to offer I think a good example of something that happened in the past.
And I think it kind of speaks to what I was saying in the sense that if the main thing you're talking about is headcounts and rates instead of objectives and outcomes, you're kind of naturally ending up at that point in the conversation by the nature of the conversation that you're having. So it's
actually, I remembered. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, man.
Please go, Bam.
I remember, sorry, what my point was about, like, what I learned from Riot as well was, like, what they said to me. It was Darren Merritt at that point, Darren Merritt, Sebring Green. I think they won't hate me mentioning them here, but it was one of the things that I learned, and it's really, like, they literally changed the way that I thought about how we work as an external partner, right? And it was something along the lines of, would you have 100 infantry, or would you have 10 special force? Right? You go into battle. Would you have 100 infantry, or you have 10 special force? And to my mind, I'd go into battle with 10 special force. Right? Now, the reason for that is you can then demonstrate the value, and that's why you have to get beyond the hourly rate. Because what you can do with those 10 special forces, like we've had these cases like this, I would say this, but I will say it, where we've come in, we've said, okay, how many have you got? And I'll use arbitrary numbers. So like we've got 15 on the outsource side, and we've come in and looked and gone, we can do it with 10. We can do it more effectively. We can work more effectively. We can do that. And I think that's where you get to, right? And then I will go off on a bit of a tangent, but I'll go with this anyway. Erik talked about the bridge. It is the bridge. DevQA is that bridge. But then the way that we think about QA is wrong. QA is the bridge to our plan, right? That's ultimately what it is that we're doing. And if you take those feedback loops at every point in that QA process, that's then what makes it most powerful. And then you're into live service and you're listening to what the players are talking about and the bugs that they're encountering. You can always bring that feedback back, right? So that your feedback loops work all the way through. When it comes down to spiner management, and like I said, it's just, what are you after? I don't want to call it cannon fodder, but do you want inventory, or do you want something that's like more specialized? And it has to be more specialized today. There's data, there's working in engine, there's tools. Erik, everything I'm saying, right? But we have to get beyond that hourly rate. And Pietro, to your point, it is a business. There are margins that you have to run, right? But you can only do that with long-term engagement, and then you can start to talk about rates. Because if you engage for the longer term, I can run my numbers. I can look at what my profitability is. I can look at what my bottom line costs are, and I can tell you, yes, whether we can do that or whether we can't. Those tend to be the arguments, but you sort of, it's not a bugbear of mine, right? Because it's business at the end of the day. But if you're simply looking at the hourly rate, I do believe that you're looking at your business and how you're running your outsourced business in the wrong way. There's no doubt in my mind that that's not what you should be looking at. Look at the bigger picture. Look at what you're trying to do. Objectives and outcomes, Mr. Hittenhausen, right? It's those sort of things. So I think we need to get out of that mentality, because that hasn't changed since I started. Like, we started Babling like March, there you go. How happy I was to start my own company. March the 13th, 1998. And we're still having this conversation.
Yeah. No, I really like that analogy. So if I can expand upon that, or kind of tie it back to what we were talking about early engagement and setting the stage for success. by having 10 special forces early on that can establish a beachhead, and they can do the recon, and they can identify and blow up those key defensive positions before you bring in the waves. Instead of sending people over the wall in the trenches by the hundreds, you can do some more targeted surgical strikes. And then perhaps instead of 100 grunts, you can make it work with 50 grunts by having 10 special forces prep the charge, if you will.
I think I think we need to no, like it's funny. You need to tone it down with all this battle and wars and charges and infantry. I'm really afraid that the YouTube is gonna ban us. Like, no, this is a terrorist attack or something like that. No, no, no. Just jokes aside. Jokes aside. Sorry. But yeah, I concur with what you were saying. I think that Ben, you probably wanted to finish. Let's finish it with this because I want to talk about something else. But please go, Ben, with what you. I think you wanted to say something else.
Yeah, and one of the things, it is infantry, right? And infantry has place, right? There's no doubt about it. Go back to our training grounds. We go about, the leaders that we have tomorrow, right? This is our responsibility. But when I was first looking at like how does live service QA work, we got into and we started looking at like military methodologies. I'm not ex-military. I would do very badly in the military,
I
quite
am.
frankly. Oh, okay, right, yeah, we don't have whatever, but we looked at it, or I looked at it, and how do we do live service QA? And the military used this thing, and it's called a tooth to tail ratio, and it's how many troops do you need to control a certain situation, and what resources that's the teeth, what's the tail you need behind that in order to support that. And that goes back to me to what Erik was saying about objectives and outcomes, right? You've got to set it up properly. You have to plan for it properly. And whether it's special forces or whether it's infantry, right? Get your tooth to tail right. That allows you to effectively run it. It's again the old argument, like you go in, like when I'm representing clients on the studio side and we're looking at like how the outsource partners work, we're not just looking about who's running their QA department. We're looking at like what their spine of management looks like, from senior through lead through whatever you hire up. What does that spine look like? If that spine's not strong, you're probably not going to be a good partner, right? You probably won't be able to execute on that quality. So I think the tooth to tail thing as well, you think you can use that in any way you see fit. But if you start to think about things like that, then you can start to say, right, this is how I should structure this project we're going to work on.
Very good. Yeah, yeah. Well, perfect analogy. I like this tooth and tail. I didn't know like in English, but I know I know that. It's super interesting. Thank you, Ben. You know what?
Yeah, no, and
You want? Okay, please go.
just on the topic of live games as well. What you kind of see is that this is nothing new, but with games as a service, the benchmark is kind of moved from that, the quality upon release being that key pivotal benchmark, moving to the consistency of your quality and the consistency of your release cadence as you're continuously engaging with your users and giving them new content. And the obvious or easy trap is like, well, we're adding new stuff to the game every 2 weeks, so we have to test the whole game plus the new stuff every 2 weeks. And if you're doing the waves over the trenches approach, that's where you end up, and you quickly end up so ineffective and inefficient. And this is where you need to have that strong spine to once again follow on your analogy, Ben, where if you have people that really understand the game systems, and have a good understanding of QA, you can understand, okay, what are we doing in this patch? What are we touching? What do we need to really focus on? And what are the things we're probably not touching as much? You don't need to test every single item or permutation or iteration or interaction in the game on every single release. You need to understand where the risks are. And to have that understanding, you need to have that earlier engagement. You need to have that better technical competence, and you need to have that real QA expertise. And you can always get valuable user feedback, but a user doesn't know intrinsically the game or its systems, right? That's where that integration of development and QA again is so important.
Yeah. And it's true. I mean, 100%, 110% agree. And it's something that we talk about at JagX and something we talk about now, right? And people talk about risk-based planning. Very few people seem to do it, right? Risk-based planning. We talked about your players will find your bugs before you do, right? So what does your fatui look like? How long is it before you need to keep them in there? Once they're in, then you're relying on what their feedback looks like to bring back on the edge cases, right? But truly, what is your risk base? Because you can't cover everything. I think about, we got asked, like, how are you going to, it's a very large open world survival game. Like, how are you going to test it? And they're like, it's on an island. I'm like, yeah, and the island's the size of Croatia. Where do we start with that, right? So the risk based, what are our players going to run into? How do we maximize that experience? How do we get them in enjoying the game? Then everything else. And to Erik's point, right, the existing content. If you're releasing new content and it hasn't touched the old content, don't touch it, right? It's just last known good. That's also what automation solves for, right? Last known good. To shamelessly steal from a Microsoft phrase that I've used a lot, but that's really what it's about, right? But
What aspect of QA can AI realistically replace? In where does it fall short also? Because like AI powered bug detection, can automated tools replace traditional FQA testers? Or for example, also I can think of like will AI reduce the manual workload of QA tester, or will it lead to fewer QA jobs in the future? Which I personally don't think so, but I want to know what is your view on AI? Since already, Erik, you kind of like zigzagged into AI before we went into this type of conversation. Now, I really would like to tackle AI and the impact on on QA games QA.
Yeah, so I think this is a very interesting topic. I definitely think, as I was kind of saying before, that uh, conceptualization of the testing is going to be an increasing focus for the QA people, where the execution is going to move more and more towards tools and AI. The pace, it's kind of a question also of like how quickly does technology and AI accelerate the pace, scope, and complexity of development against the scope and complexity of the QA that then needs to be done on it? Because if AI systems start to become integrated that make games increasingly non-deterministic, that also greatly increases the complexity of the testing required. But human eyes will always be necessary. Individual perspectives of different people, a real subjective view and on user acceptance, user pain, and really assessing like is the game fun, which I think AI is still quite far away from doing in any kind of meaningful way. And surely nobody would ship a game worth millions without any humans having had a proper look at it to see if it's actually going to pass muster. I think that looking at the AI space, people seem to be idealizing its potential a bit too much and kind of making an analogy to cars. Everybody wants to make the self-driving car. Everybody wants to make the self-testing AI. But there's still so much low-hanging fruit to harvest. And sticking to the car analogy, having the rain detector in the windscreen that automatically triggers the windshield wiper, or having the automated climate control inside the car, or having the car open and unlock the door as you approach the door, or open the booth as you walk behind back, and etc. etc. There's so many things you can do before you have to fully autonomize the entire vehicle. And I think there's a lot of opportunities further down that people are not really talking about as much, because everybody's talking about how AI is going to do everything. So again, I think having a lot of the execution done by AI and having QA personnel writing test scenarios and describing test conditions is how AI is going to be used as a force multiplier, not as a replacement of human testing.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Very, very, very valid point, and also like very much your the car analogy. I liked it very much. Good one. Thank you. Ben, what's your how do you see this? I see from this cuff like what? Okay.
All right, so let me try and frame it up, right? How I think about it. I will start by saying, like, I'm not a very technical person, right? So when it's first like, it's AI, Google it. If you look back at like when AI, the term was first coined, it wasn't actually artificial intelligence. It was actually around intelligence amplification. And I think that's how you should start to think about it. I think I totally agree with what Erik has said, but I don't believe in our case it's generative. And I think it's very difficult to get generative AI technology into games because it's not clear at the moment like who owns that, right? So when you think about QA, it's augmented to me, right? And if I really frame it up into this conversation, right, QA is facing three major challenges, right? There are three major challenges that we're facing. One is the existing volume. One is the volume of existing content, which we discussed before, right? Is the new content, has it touched any of that particular part? But that last no good. But the volume of existing content, the easiest way, or if I say easy, it's not easy, but the way to solve that is automation, right? And normally when you look at an engine, whether it's Unreal, whether it's Unity, whether it's proprietary, it really takes people inside the studio to be able to build those hooks into the code, right? So that's the first one, is that existing volume. And the second one is the speed that content is coming out. It's the speed and amount of content that's coming at your test teams, right? And when I think about that, that's when I start to think about things like they're tools that augment what the testers do. How can we give them tools that help them validate their decisions? How do we get them tools that help them jump to places in like these maps? The worlds are enormous, right? What if we just built a teleporter so they can jump in? What if we've got a heat map, a development heat map that says this is where the changes have been made, right? Just to like those more precise points of augmenting what the testers do, those tools, that's where I think a lot of the opportunity is. And I think that's what you probably call AI assist, right? Or what I've heard in venture capital terms be like, vertical SaaS. Because the fact is that when you really look at it, what the opportunity is, all of these layoffs, everything else, is like there's so much inefficiency in production ops. There's so much inefficiency in production that, when you add all of those little bits up, you can get that, right? That's the second bit, right? That velocity. So what are the tools that we can provide our testers? There's data analysis tools, right? Whatever that happens to be, right? That then builds their career path. That opens up career pathing for them. We're enabling them, right? You go from your development of being like, well, I'm infantry, I want to get to special forces, or I want to get to signals, or whatever it happens to be, right? We can open up that data analysis bits because people aren't born to be data analysts, right? And then the third challenge that we've got is what I talked about before, the size of it and the fact that your players are going to find your edge cases faster than you are. And if that's the case, you can't read 100,000 Reddit comments or whatever that happens to be, or the forums and all that sort of thing. But if you've got player reports of bugs, you've got technology in the background that augments that triages it. I've got 1,000 people that are complaining about this cosmetic because it doesn't work. Puts that into the one bug report that you can then send back to your live teams, your live QA teams or bug Q teams or whatever, and then either they can replicate or they can put it goes up into Jira. So I think it's, for me, when I look at it, it's augmented. I don't think it's going to replace. I don't think that we're at that point yet. Will things change? Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, 30 years of doing this. First, when Babel first started, we used to fax bug reports to the client. We used to have this printer that just ran all the time in the office, right? We used to videotape bugs and stuff like that, whereas now, like, a lot of that stuff can be done remotely. So it will change, technology will change, but we have to see that as an enabler to what it is that we do. It's not going to replace human beings, right? Erik's point, like finding the fun, right? Also, humans are devious bastards, right? They'll just like find the exploits. They'll find the things that you shouldn't do. They'll go back, finding those exploits, those sort of things. I think it's that, but we give them the tools to augment that, to make them more effective, more efficient at what they do. And I believe that by doing that, we then enable their careers and we develop them, we develop them. People that want to go into production or like I said, engineering, design, data analysis, whatever that happens to be. That's the way that we should be using.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And the data analysis part is absolutely key to that as well. And then really using AI to augment your human capability, mainly to improve your iteration and do repetitive things like regression, but even reproduction. Or let's say you run into a desync in multiplayer once or twice. Is this a fluke? Is this a real big problem? Having tools on the data and the automation side that record player telemetry and allow you to record and then play it back, and then you can say, "Hey, I just had this issue. Can you repeat what I just did 10,000 times and tell me how many times this problem reoccurs?" And it tells you relatively quickly, rather than requiring you to actually manually do it 10,000 times to get that answer. That's where you can iterate much more quickly and where you can more reliably put your finger on the painful spot, really suss out those issues that otherwise you would only find, precisely to Ben's point with that 1 minute analogy, once you release your game to the wild. Because you can have cloud-based AIs run hundreds of thousands of iterations in a way that you just feasibly cannot do with humans.
It's like that. I see your perspective. So we're still in the phase where so I like especially the analogy of like augmented testing, augmented QA, or it's interesting because like I also agree that as also Eric said, like a pair of like human eye would always be needed on your game. The point though, like, or actually the question I have for you, if we need to make, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to make this sort of estimate, but do you see, or at least a reduction of the human QA necessary on games in the future with automation or with AIs? I'd rather say on automation rather than AI, because I personally see it, because like why you still need a pair of eyes when I'm not talking about reduction of 50% for me, but some impact is gonna have it, in my opinion.
I think the irony is, for me, is that it could happen if people would embrace QA more in the ways we were talking about earlier on in this conversation, which that would need to become the trend. I think right now, because people have been asking this question for over a decade. We're asking the same question a decade ago, and yet I still see the complexity and scale and scope of both games and the teams supporting them going up, generally speaking. So the expansion of scope, scale, and complexity of the games and development processes themselves is keeping pace, if not outpacing, the typical complexity and sophistication of QA. So if that trend would invert, then perhaps it would start going the other way. But I think for now, those kind of things are kind of running in tandem. The development and the games become more complex, bigger scale, and the same is happening to QA. And I think, kind of re-emphasizing the point we were talking about earlier, is I think there should be more emphasis on that sophistication and complexity on the QA side rather than just on the scale.
There are efficiencies, right? There is no doubt. I mean, to put a number on it, in my mind, there are so many inefficiencies. I think with tools, personally, from what I'm seeing with things that, DAQA have built, there's a 20% efficiency in it. But the efficiency then allows the tester to go and do more stuff. I don't see it being a reduction because the content's going, right? All we're saying is like, we'll help you become more efficient, right? We'll help you do your job. We'll make your job easier, right? Implementation of that is very difficult, right? But, changing the way that people work, It's very difficult to get people to adopt technologies and things like that. But if you manage that, there's an efficiency there. But I don't believe that the efficiency, and we haven't seen it in the history of video games, that the efficiency will mean, oh, we're going to use less people. Games companies, game studios across the board, when they find ways to give them efficiencies, the efficiencies mean they can release more content. Like nothing's going anywhere, right? This is simply that's what it is. There's more content coming. So yes, there is the efficiency. Does it mean that people, same with automation? Automation is just last known good. You can't really just have people doing that. You want people on the new stuff, new release, right? So yes, there is the opportunity to do that, but like I said, I think it just become repurposed. It's not going to be looked at as a cost saving.
So, yes, super relatable what you said. I remember I was at RovioCon lately, like in November, and someone was exactly saying that we shouldn't expect such a big reduction in manual labor in general, because also because of AI, people are going to be more efficient, are going to create and produce more content. So there's going to be more content to be, so more and more creatives, more so everything is gonna snowball down, down the slope for everyone. There's gonna be more work for everyone, and while AI is gonna replace some of the manual work that we do now, still there's gonna be like more content coming down the line, and so more people are gonna be necessary, or the same amount of people are gonna be necessary. And I know if that is, that I remember this being said at RovioCon, and I thought that fits exactly what you were saying before.
And I'll shamelessly steal it as well, but Stephen Peacock, who's head of AI at Keywords, I've worked on with Steve for years, and he used the Disney analogy. But when computer animation and stuff came in, they're like, oh, it's going to replace the Illustrator. It didn't. It just allowed Disney to move from a point where they released one movie a year or every few years, being able to release 10 a year, whatever, right? It just increases that demand.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So then, question, right? Let's say I'm going to try to post this on quality assurance groups, so that I hope that there is someone out there in QA nowadays, especially, let's say, like the scenario in which like there is a QA tester out there, he likes his job, but is now wondering what is going to happen, what should I do, how can QA professionals, so in this case, this QA tester that is out there watching this video, how can they adapt to an AI-driven future and remain indispensable? What is your suggestion, recommendation? If you had to tell this person, if you had this person in front of you, you tell like, just do this one thing, or it can just simply be a worry not, or just being focused. I don't know, whatever it is. Let's start with Ben.
I'll come at it from a slightly different angle. It comes down to I've had time to reflect, a lot of time for reflection. And like I said at the beginning of this conversation, I remember we were recording it on night. I had this realization last night that I'm actually 30 years. I've been doing games QA, 30 years, right? And there are very few of us, Eric, I think you can testify, that stick at it for that long, right? And I am not one of those people that will sit here and say, you start in QA, you have to stay in QA, right? I don't believe that. I think QA is an awesome training ground, and I think you need to follow your passion, right? Very few of us get born with a silver spoon in our mouths, right? A lot of the time it's literally down to hard work, it's dedication, but you've got to do, I use this in job interviews, like when I'm interviewing people, and it's normally just a validation, right? Because I can't do the operational stuff. But my question is like, what gets you out of bed in the morning? We're like, oh, I work in games. But then it's like, but what truly gets you out? What is it about working in games? Because working in games is cool. What truly is it that drives you? Like, what do you want to do? Right? Are you more data analyst minded? Are you more engineering minded? Do you want to move into production? Are you an individual? Like some people they just want to test, and they're really good at that. Or they're an engineer, all they want to do is just code, right? So we need to enable those different career paths and things like that. But to this day, I mean, I'll write something about this as well. Like I still tell people to this day when I meet somebody at a barbecue or whatever, right? It's like, what are you doing? I don't say, oh, I'm co-founder and managing partner of DAQL, or I'm VP of games operations. I just say, I'm a games tester. I test video games. And the look of wonder that you get every time when they go like, that's a job? Quickly followed by, do you play games all day, right? But my point being is, I think what we do is really cool. I've stuck with this for 30 years, right? I mean, you can move to production. I know production people that have moved to QA, right? They're all viable careers, but like, what is it that drives you, right? And if you know that, you know yourself. I didn't know this till I was like 35, man. I mean, I'm old, right? But like, what motivates me is like, I love games. I love games QA. I like to do the things that dev teams don't think are particularly sexy, but we do the stuff that will help you launch, keep you live, stop the plane falling out of the sky. And really what gets me going is that interaction with the player, QA being the bridge, right? That's sort of what drives me. I like solutions. I like figuring stuff out. But so my advice would be like, embrace the tools, but figure out what it is through the training ground that is QA, and like, where do you want to go? Because the only thing that, I posted about it the other day, like, we have a mural on the wall in New Orleans, right? And it says, believe in your power to level up. We will enable you. The proudest, I was thinking about it. What am I most proud about? I'm most proud about when we started Babel or all of these different companies I've worked with or built or grown or whatever it happens to be, looking around and seeing those testers and those project managers who are now head of localization here, head of QA there, head of that studio here, executive producer there. That makes me proud, right? So if you want to know where you're going and what you should be doing, I think is like, just what gets you out of bed in the morning? What are you passionate about? Because that really comes through. When you do that, that drives. It's just, it's hard work, man, and it'll be hard. Like, but life is hard. Unless
Yeah.
you've all had silver spoon in your mouth, which all of us, most of us aren't, right? What do you love to do?
What do you love to do? No, it's incredibly valuable. This is that you all said. For me personally, I liked QA so much that if I could be, if I could have a job as a game tester today, of course, with a salary that is at the same level of what I'm making today, of course, because it's more of an entry job. But if I could, I would. I swear, I would keep my podcast and I would be a QA tester. And I could do both LQA and FQA because I like both of them. So I would do it. It just I remember that those are the best days of my professional life. I changed like 3 different industries, but that particular job was the thing. I remember. You remember when you said what gets you out of bed? That was getting me out of bed. I remember in Frankfurt at Nintendo, I was happy to get up. Sunday was coming. I didn't have Blue Mondays at all. I was getting up in the morning. Yes, let's go there. It sounds crazy. Maybe also I was like younger. Maybe but the idea is that will get me out of bed. Just going, playing a game, and finding bug. Especially the most fun part, which is the destructive testing, or But in general, I was really happy to do that job. Eric?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking of what I can add to that without solely echoing what was said. Um, I think to Ben's point, really kind of finding your niche within the niche is very important. And again, we've been talking about how complexity of QA in development is growing. And by extension, QA is not a monolith. It is not like one singular set of skills. It's a multitude of skills, and there's different roads to Rome in that sense. If you have a higher affinity for data and analysis, you might want to do a Power BI course and play around create a dashboard that gives you insights beyond what you're getting out of your basic Jira view, which already is pretty good actually these days. If you're interested in gameplay and level design, play around with the editors. The big engine companies are really all in on trying to make their software as user friendly as they can. Kind of harkening back to what we were saying before, that with the shortage of talent in development before, a lot of people were predicting that we're going to run out of people that can actually use the tools to make the game. So a lot of effort is being put into making the tools more user friendly. A lot of these tools you can just download for Unreal and for Unity and just start playing around with them. If that's something that you're interested in, get involved in the modding community. People will be very excited to have you on their team if you can bring those kind of skills.
That's a good addition, actually. Well, I think you gave a very practical example, a practical suggestion of what to do if you want to remain, irreplaceable or useful. Let's just say useful, and also being able to embrace the future of game QA, the future of gaming, and everything. I liked it. Yeah. So thank you, bro. If
Kind of find a professional passion that you can combine with your passion for games, and have them be each other's catalysts, and it will go a long way.
this episode, I think is gonna be super good for everyone to watch, especially if you are in QA. If you're not in QA, still I think it's an interesting aspect of game development, and particularly, I like that we didn't have a negative or a pessimistic view on the future, which I like to, you tend to hear very often, especially when you're traveling for work. There are a lot of pessimistic views out there. Sometimes I find myself having like pessimistic thoughts, but I would say that in the end, I remain optimistic, quite as you guys are, and also hearing it from two people like you, like yourself here, that have real, true, hands-on experience on QA. I find it liberating, almost, if I can say that way. So I would like to thank you for having been here, for accepting my invitation, for being my guest, for coming to My Name is Mario, even. But guys, once again, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. I'm not gonna extend the arm like here 45 degrees, but thank you from the bottom of my heart, and see you next time. Let's be in contact.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I like to thank you, Mario, by the way.
Oh, thank you, Pietro. Sorry,
Beautiful. It happens to me so many times. People that know me for years, then I go around with my thing, My Name is Mario, and then people are like, hey, Mario's like, I'm Pietro, you remember? Oh yeah, right, sorry. So don't worry, it's totally fine. Eric, I see that you want to say something.
Oh no, I'm just smiling.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you, listener. Next episode is gonna be with someone who's gonna help us to understand how to unlock yourself, how to unlock the real you, your true potential. I hope you're gonna be there for the next episode too. If you want more episodes about QA or about some specific topic, you can put a comment in there. But anyway, thank you very much to everyone for watching, and to my guests for being here. Goodbye.